personally believe that there is a deep relationship between the events of 9/11 and peak oil, but it's not something I can prove. There's a lot of circumstantial bits and pieces that when you add them up together paint a pretty persuasive picture, I think. The CIA's been studying the phenomenon of oil peaks since the 1970s. And Dick Cheney, former CEO of Halliburton, the world's foremost oil services company, has talked about the difficulty that the oil industry will have in meeting demand by the end of the first decade of the 21st century. Now, what happened after 9/11? Well, of course, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan and used that occasion to build military bases throughout the region of Central Asia, which is the new oil production region. Lots of new oil discoveries there in, coincidentally, 2000 to 2001. And then to invade Iraq, one can't help but see a pattern here. It seems evident to me that 9/11 was in effect a kind of pretext for the U.S. to expand its military hold on the two most important oil-producing regions of the planet.
There are a number of elites, number of very influential policy advisors, a lot of people who went on to form part of the administration knew that peak oil was coming. They knew that they would not be able to survive peak oil without having this massive militarization of policy, and thirdly, that they needed to do that on the back of a drastic attack or perception of a threat in invasion to the United States, and this is what 9/11 provided.
In our work, the fundamental job that we do for people is in understanding what's really going on and trying to understand what is behind events and what is motivating people. That's different from passing judgment on it. We're not trying to make value judgments. We try to eschew value judgments as much as possible, as a matter of fact, in our consulting work. We are very interested in what really happened on 9/11, is the short answer.
Well, you have four options to declare 9/11. One is it was a strike out of the blue. Nobody knew anything. It was the first version the American administration told the public. Then they knew a lot, but in different agencies, and the picture was so difficult to put together that they couldn't find out what was happening, what was in the future. And I think it has broken down, but the administration is fighting on this line. The third option is they let it happen. They knew something, or they knew the whole story and let it happen because they could use it in order to bring about war against up to 60 states, as they said later on. And the fourth version is they organized it or were part of organizing it. And the way it happened is so strange, and the unwillingness of the administration to clear up all the environment is so strong that I've finally come to the belief that it must be a steered operation, covert operation. Yeah.
When I started looking through the 9/11 Commission report, I was outraged. I mean, here was a book that had shot to the top of the bestseller lists, and Americans, millions of Americans, were looking to this report, this book, to tell them what actually happened on September 11th, 2001. And they were doing so under the assumption that there had been a clear, open inquiry into the events, that all of the relevant questions had been asked and evidence had been provided. And this clearly was not the case.
Well, the Keane report on 9/11, which was finally set up, I think is not a serious examination of what happened and what the causes were. I say that, first of all, because clearly the Bush administration didn't want to do it. They resisted all the calls for an official inquiry for several months. And what actually finally persuaded them to do this was not the politicians in Congress. It was the families, the wives of those who were killed at 9/11.
The first thing it does is name the 19 hijackers, the mostly Saudi nationals. But of course, we heard within days of the events that something like 5 or 6 of these people were still alive and well and living in the Middle East. Why wasn't this addressed in the 9/11 Commission report? Why weren't why wasn't there some inquiry as to who were the real hijackers if in fact the people who had been identified were clearly not the right people?
And on the day itself, which I think is the most significant evidence, the first plane hit at 8:46 a.m., the Southern Tower at about 9:05 a.m., the third plane hit the Pentagon at 9:38 a.m. They knew there was a hijack between 8:10 and 8:20 in the morning, let's say 8:15, so they knew half an hour before the first plane, 3/4 of an hour before the second plane, and an hour and a half before the third plane hit their targets. And not once in that time did they scramble a warplane to intercept. Now that is just staggering. When first of all they had Andrews Air Base, which is 10 miles west of Washington, with F-16s with a top speed of 1,500 miles an hour, they could have been over the scene within a minute or two. Why were none of them scrambled? Secondly, you might think, well, there was chaos, no one knew what to do, it was a catastrophe, but
just standard operating procedure. When a plane is off course, fighter jets are notified. Fighter jets go out to see if the plane's having a problem or just, well, what the problem is, because the plane's obviously off course. And for the year before 9/11/01, fighter jets were called out on 67 occasions. So the question is, when we knew of at least 4 planes were off course. And there's words that it was even up to 11. But where were the fighter jets? They weren't there. Now, from our research, which people wouldn't know, we have now found out that there were 15 exercises going on that day involving all the fighter jets in the northeastern portion of the United States. What are the odds of that occurring? Like 0? I mean, or 100%. 100% they couldn't occur without a fix being in.
Why had these towers fallen so quickly, these steel-framed towers? No steel-framed buildings had ever collapsed before because of fire. Why wasn't there a proper inquiry? I think something like $600,000 was spent to investigate why the Twin Towers collapsed. Meanwhile, something like $52 million were spent to investigate whether Bill Clinton had had an affair. This is absurd.